it's just a different kind of narrative about what the gospel is. We've been bewitched. We've been intoxicated by power. We have created enemies where God has not intended us to create enemies. We routinely come up with new villains and new boogeymen who have to be on the receiving end of our ire to make sure that we get the right people voted in. And we're really not embodying what the kingdom of heaven actually is, as we see in the Gospels and the Sermon on the Mount, and how Paul works that out.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Whiskey in the Writings. I'm your host, Joe, and we have an exciting episode in store for you, our very first interview on Whiskey in the Writings. Before we get into that, let's talk about what we're drinking today. I've got some Japanese whiskey. I am excited to share this because it came from a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Jeff Binford, who was in Japan, brought me home this bottle for my birthday this past year, and just excited to share it with you. It's a really great whiskey. I'm not a big Japanese whiskey guy, so this is something that I'm growing in the taste. It tastes different than your typical bourbon, and you can even see in the bottle. I don't know if you can see it, but maybe it's much lighter in color. I'm not even sure how long this has been aged. I'm not even sure about that. Usually the darker color comes from how long it's been aged. So I'm not sure exactly here, but the tasting notes are going to be things like vanilla. It's going to be minty. This particular brand, I think this is how you say it, Shinobu. I'm not entirely sure, but it is a malt whiskey finished off in Japanese oak. And so we're going to be drinking this today for this episode of Whiskey in the Writings. Whatever you have in front of you, pour your drink responsibly. Cheers. Here we go. Okay, so we're talking to Mario today. And I know you don't know Mario, and that's what I love about these interviews that I'm going to be doing over the course of Whiskey in the Writings this year and into the future years, is that I'm just talking to people that I find very interesting or have made an impact in my life in some way. These are people that I have questions, and I want to wrestle with questions with them. It's something that the group of people I'm around, we talk theology all the time. And so these are people that I find very interesting. I think you'll find interesting too. And so I've reached out to a bunch of people in my life that we're going to be bringing on and having different discussions and topical discussions about. Today, we're talking with Mario about broken church and can it be fixed? That's a big topic. And before we get into all of that, let me just tell you a little bit about Mario. This is someone who's been a dear friend of mine for all of my adult life. I met him when I was a teenager. We worked together in Boise on staff at a church as pastors. He went off to school. I continued down being a pastor. When I started the church, my wife and I started our church, The Gathering. We would bring Mario out to lecture and to teach. He's a brilliant mind, a brilliant thinker. He is the reason I am the way I am in a lot of sense. He was the first one to ask me a thoughtful question to really get me to wrestle about what I believe. He introduced me to scholars like N.T. Wright, to Dr. John Dixon, to John Lennox, to Craig Blomberg, like all of these great thinkers of Christianity, he introduced me to. And so I just owe a great deal of gratitude and debt to this person. Outside of my wife, Mario has had the greatest impact in my spiritual development, hands down. And so I couldn't be more excited to have Mario on this episode, on this inaugural interviewing thing that we're going to be doing here on Whiskey in the Writings. I'm just very, very excited to introduce you to Mario. Couple things you need to know about Mario. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Utah. He graduated with a master's in Christian apologetics from Biola. He's had the privilege to serve the broader church for, over 20 years. He's specifically interested in the intersection of spiritual formation and justice. He currently works at Creighton University as the director of Intercultural Center. He's been married for 23 years to an amazing woman with 2 kids in college, and he's a host parent to 3 teenage boys from China. Without further ado, I am so happy to introduce you to my good friend, my dear brother, Mario Alejandre. Let's get started. The topic I sent over to you was broken church, can it be fixed? And the reason why I want to talk to you about this, because we had a conversation, it might have been about a year ago, and I remember I was processing I was in the midst of a transition spiritually, mentally from my vocation as a pastor. And, it's odd that you've seen me on this journey where I retired and then I got hired. Like, I wasn't looking to get a job, and all of a sudden they want to hire me. And so I move into this associate pastor role. And I remember you were one of the first people I called, and I was like, dude, what do I need to know, getting back into this? And so you've been a part of that journey. I remember top points of frustration, calling you, talking to you. And it was in one of these moments that I was advocating that I want to fight for this kind of, and you should need to know, I'm just, whether you want to go on this train with me or not, but the like Christian nationalism and the evangelical conservative stream of Christianity that I find disruptive to the way of the kingdom of God, and antithetical in some ways to the way of the kingdom of God. And my desire, so it was at this time where I'm seeing this tension and this rub, and I'm going, we got to do something. We got to say something, like, what can we do? And you said something, and you might not have said it exactly in this way, but this is exactly how I remember it. So correct me if you're like, no, I really didn't say it like that, Joe. But I remember going like, dude, like, what can we do? And you just said this as plain as day. You said, Joe, that generation just needs to die, or they just need to die off. And I'll tell you, there were 2 things. One, I was shocked, because you have always been someone in my life who has found a way forward in the midst of confusion and darkness. You have been someone in my life who has carved a stream out of maybe where I'm at and opened a door to a new pathway for me to grow and to mature in my faith. You've always been that. So to hear that, it felt like very much a closed door. So I was shocked, because I'm like, this is someone that is my brother, and I've never heard him talk like this. Then so that was like jarring. And then 2, I was like, I didn't agree with you. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I actually don't, wait, no, that's too aggressive and too much. Okay. So as what happens, and it's a long intro, but as what happens is that I stew on what you say, and it takes me time to actually navigate because I jump in and out of your, like, it'll just pop in thought, and then I'll like have other things I'm working on, and all that to say, processing. And then I find myself in a spot to go, maybe he's right. And I don't know if it's the experiences I've had over the past year, that it's just like, dude, I don't know what to do with this generation or this culture. I don't know if it's a generation. I want to say I don't think it is. All that to say, I find myself resonating with what you said. And so I wanted to explore that with you. One, I want to give you an opportunity to explain yourself for those that are like, what is he talking about? But two, I actually want to dive deeper because I think at the heart and root of what you're lamenting, maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, or prophetically claiming, um, not to get super Pentecostal or evangelical on me, but there's something there, and so I just want to get into that. So essentially, let's just start with this, Mario. When you said that that generation needs to die off, what did you actually mean, and what were you not saying?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would tell you is, this is hearing you describe how you heard what I said is this is the first time that I get to hear that in real time as well. And so I think one of the things that I've had to just come to terms with, even with my own spiritual journey and trajectory, and you're right, you and I have been on a parallel track. We've known each other for over 20 years. We were roommates together. A lot of our kingdom trajectory of like being apprentices and disciples of Jesus. I mean, we've journeyed together, and we've been in the same water. We've struggled with the same things, and so one of the things that I have really discovered, even now, as what I would describe as being happily middle aged, with fewer years in front of me than behind me, is being okay with sharing things that maybe like you said, like I've never heard Mario talk like this, right? Because
Yeah.
typically that my but I what I would want to say, and then I'll get into the content. So the first thing I'll say this, that is what I said, right? Like I would own that that is what I said, and I meant what I meant when I said it, right? So but there are some things but there are some things that I think could be misunderstood by someone who might apply that too broadly. Um, I, as somebody who as friends, it would never be something I would intentionally do to feel like I was cutting off a path for growth or a way forward. But in some ways, right, in some ways, that statement for me was an articulation of this is the way forward for me, right? There is this idea of, we have another mutual friend, Sam Wheatley, who uses the phrase like leaving Tundra Town. Like this was me kind of navigating the journey going like, this has nothing to do sometimes with many of the people in these contexts whom I love, who I consider brothers and sisters, who I would break bread with and pray with, and if they needed anything and call me, I would be there for them. But this is really about, for me, my understanding of a larger framework, a system that I think is not it's not kingdom centric in any real meaningful way, shape, or form. It is a distortion of what I believe Jesus actually embodied and talked about and encourages us to talk about. And so part of that informed that statement of saying like that that thing just needs to be done. It needs to have its time. It needs to have its moment. It needs to be sunsetted because there's going to I think there is something more authentically wholehearted that we're invited to and to envision. And so my statement invites more questions and critiques than
Okay.
probably, but it's kind of where I
Well,
was at when I said
let's for those that maybe are lost in the that might be listening and they're just kind of going like, what are they even talking about? Let's name it. Let's name the tension, the elephant in the room. For you, what needs to what or who needs to die off?
So I think it is this. So what it needs to go away, or what needs to die off, is this commitment that Christianity is embedded with a particular political ideology, and that to be faithful, to be orthodox, is to synonymously be a part of a current stream of Christian nationalism that sees the American nation as exceptional, that sees a particular set of geopolitics a particular way, that often engage that there is more of a quest for social and political power through might, coercion, and manipulation than there really is a real kingdom mindset. And I also think too with that comes some theological understanding of a kind of a Gnostic view of what the gospel is, that this is all very personal, about a personal decision to go to a disembodied place when we die. And there's some of that theology that I think needs to be um,
Sure.
um, recaptured and reunderstood. But primarily when I'm talking, the basis or the starting point for me is this conflation between to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus means you have this particular political
Okay.
view, and we would describe it as Christian nationalism.
Okay. Let me, for the sake of argument, I'd like to play devil's advocate and actually try to strongman the other side. So I want to try to do my best, not to straw man, to like, but to actually best represent maybe what that side is actually advocating for and how they could come to that reasoning scripturally to support that point of view. And I want to invite you to challenge. How would you challenge me? And so
Mhm.
um my so I would say this, most the people that I experience that have that stream of thought come from a mainly a dispensational point of view, which is to say that there is a point of view of this idea of Israel and who Israel is and who we are in representation of God's new people, the covenant people. So I might pull from things like, Paul's teachings in Galatians, where in Romans, where we see this reality of potentially that we are now, as grafted into the family, we are the new Israel here on earth, and we need to be the ones representing a kingdom of God, and that actually has like a theocratic kind of positioning in that, just like Israel had a Davidic, priestly Davidic place within their geopolitical world. Thus, we also have that role to play, that we have created a representation of the kingdom of God in a geopolitical world that we actually need to utilize, to leverage, to move the kingdom forward. It's actually our responsibility to create and to be a part of maybe a governance that actually advocates for a kingdom, what I might call a kingdom mindset. So laws, leadership need to be Jesus people that vote and lead out in a way that we see, the values and ethics of what I might say is the kingdom of God. How would you respond? I think it's my strong man is I think it's actually our responsibility to do that.
So if I were talking to somebody, I would actually, and that was the case they would make, I would agree with
Okay.
everything that they just said.
So
Right.
then what's the difference then?
Apart from the dispensational framework, I think some of these commitments I could look at and go, yeah, I think, Jesus talked about the kingdom. Like Dallas Willard is one of my favorite. I mean, we talked, Dallas was
Yep.
one of my favorite authors. Dallas Willard, in one of his Veritas lectures on college campuses, talked about the idea that, the kingdom of God is political because it deals with power and it deals with people. And so
Mm.
there is a way in which we are meant to think about these things. I also been heavily influenced by another N.T. Wright, who talks about the idea that the kingdom of heaven is not of this world, but it's for this world. And so there are all of these themes that are embedded in our arguments or an argument sounds combative, but even in the ways in which we come to see the world and how we would describe what our human vocation would be. But I would say those would be areas of hopefully the idea of having a mutually shared vocabulary would allow us to have a more robust conversation about. I might agree with you that we are called to embody something to the world, and we're embodied to work for human dignity and human flourishing, and to have a society that is structured and orderly. But really, for us to really look at that and go, but the argument for me is this, that the kingdom invites us to envision all of that in a new and different way. How we view power, how we view our position towards violence, towards social programs, towards seeing how these issues oftentimes politically pit people against one another, both of whom Jesus is for. So the work for the kingdom person never always aligns with a political ideology, because my perspective is like every political ideology, if it's not really rooted in the kingdom, is going to at some point diverge and be antithetical to the kingdom. And so this tension between kingdom and empire, and I'll use that word empire descriptively creates a tension. So whether or not that person would be interested in having a conversation about how we understand those terms is a whole nother thing. But much of what you described would not be something that I would disagree with, because I do think that living in community in a particular time and space, we've been entrusted with particular responsibilities as followers of Jesus, as people who reflect the image of God, as people who I think understand the biblical story to say, like, we are placed in the world to embody who God is, but then we also embody this thing called new creation, of things being made new. So, we could, and so that for me is behind how I would really want to enter into a conversation. But it means we have to rethink our understanding of what power is, what position is, what self-giving sacrifice, what sacrificial love would look like. Esau McCauley wrote an article, I believe, for the New York Times a while back, where he was lamenting, like, he was advocating for Christians in the marketplace, and I'm paraphrasing, but one of the things that I took from his article was, he's like, I really wish there would be a Christian candidate who would run a faithful and good campaign, but at the outset say, I know I'm going to lose this thing because I'm not going to play the games. And there was something really, I think, for me that was inspiring and hopeful. Like, that's what I would long for, right?
So where do
But
you
I think,
see?
yeah.
Well, then where do you see the disconnect? So if you're so the framework I'm trying to like build out is that there is this movement that feels new for us, even though it can be traced back to, like, Reagan and like the onset of that kind of stuff, of the what is it, the righteous right, or the what are they,
The
what are
religious
they called?
right, the moral majority,
Religious
all those.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, all that kind of trait starts back in there in the late 70s, and but that maybe has manifested itself, as like fully evolved into what we see now in what we're calling Christian nationalism, is an evolution of this trajectory. So where is the disconnect if you're going, like, if I'm trying to say, like, no, it's actually our responsibility to vote and act and create systems of power that advocate for my value system. Where does that break down for you then in the problem that stems from the whole point of, like, that generation just needs to die off?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, hearing that, there's a couple things that I would say, that I could say. I think these would be points of departure where it goes sideways. I think one, having a fundamentally different understanding of what the gospel actually is. Like, look, this. You and I, again, we've grown up in these circles, and we have heard Paul used and misused, sometimes correctly, a lot of times for the benefit of our argument. I have often heard in the circles that we grew up in that, if Paul were alive today, oh boy, the letter he would write the church. And it was usually around some kind of, some kind of social behavior that church authority deemed as deviant. And I have no doubt that maybe Paul would have a critique for our ethics in that regard, right? Those are always important kingdom questions. But the truth of the matter, man, if you want to, for me, I think if Paul were alive today and we're speaking to the American evangelical church as a whole, like, I do think he's written this letter. It's called Galatians, right? The whole argument was like, how Jewish do these new believers need to be in light of circumcision, right? And the conversation that we often have is, one way we prove our fidelity to Christianity is by this espousing of a particular political view that sets up dominionism. It's just a different kind of narrative about what the gospel is. We've been bewitched. We've been intoxicated by power. We have created enemies where God has not intended us to create enemies. We routinely come up with new villains and new boogeymen who have to be on the receiving end of our ire to make sure that we get the right people voted in, and we're really not embodying what the kingdom of heaven actually is, as we see in the Gospels and the Sermon on the Mount, and how Paul works that out throughout the course of his writings and letters to the churches. And so I think that would be one place of departure. It's just maybe a fundamentally different understanding of the the all-encompassing view of what the gospel is. That, and then in American culture, that separation between, unfortunately, like a social gospel and then the gospel that saves, and these two things were always apart. Well, it was never meant to be apart, right? It was always meant to be together. And so with that, you're basically, you're telling in some ways two stories that are similar enough where they can be conflated, but they're also different enough that where there's divergence, there really becomes pain points, and there really becomes sacrifice, and there really becomes persecution, and there really becomes misunderstanding, and family members are at odds with one another, and friendships feel the tension of that because they're pulling us in two different directions.
So, okay, that's fair. Do you Would you begin to say that through the lens of like there's something happening in the church that feels broken, that feels off, and um, and it seems to be stemming from this not entirely, but like to some degree this Christian nationalism. I think to be fair to those who might be listening that are on the side of a Christian nationalist point of view, they would argue maybe it's like the woke church and kind of like, these social things that are breaking the church. We don't hold that view, but is the problem primarily like our inability to have dialogue about theology? Is it the systems are broken? Did we create a structure of church that doesn't actually look like what Jesus envisioned? Is it unexamined power? Have we created inadvertently uh, people with too much power that don't know that aren't equipped to know how to lead well through that power? Where do you think some of this is like coming from? If we were to say like what's a way forward, we have to actually be able to name what's actually broken, right? Where do you see the biggest maybe gap in that?
Okay, so understanding that, that's a big question, and I want to be really careful with this because I do think
Yep.
my tendency is to really paint with, you know, broad strokes. And the reality is this, man, like there are, my answer is more, I would just say like an overview. Within everything, we will find counter examples and maybe nuanced expressions of these things that we can look at. And so there are churches that would fall anywhere on that are well within the umbrella of orthodoxy, right? In terms of what we would say is a historically orthodox faith, who are doing really good work to embody and incarnate Jesus right now to the world, right? Even for those who have been a part of the evangelical tradition. So I want to create space for that reality. So like I know those communities are present, and I know that they're doing good work, and so my prayer is that they would remain faithful and not grow weary in well doing, because they're in many ways they're climbing uphill. But to the second question, but to the other part of like, what do we name it? So it's a good question that you're asking, and I would say this, Joe. I think that there are many people within these constructs for whom the structure and the power dynamic is unknown to them. So they have been born into, raised, and discipled in a particular environment in which there was never any real dialogue about how we got to where we got to structurally. Now, I will also say, though, with that, that there are people who are in positions of power who understand how this works. And the system that we have is exactly the system that they've wanted. Like, right, it's the idea of saying that there will be for certain individuals a benefit for this kind of system because it allows them to consolidate power, it allows them to consolidate control, it allows them to control a narrative. Um, and when you study the history of how evangelicalism really embraced a particular kind of engaging the social square politically, like this is what has been manifested now, it may be the case that someone might be like, oh, we didn't know it'd be like this.
Hmm.
That might be fair. But you can't be surprised because this was always going to be the fruit of this kind of endeavor. So systems, like I don't know of anyone who puts a system together that doesn't have an envision a kind of end in mind.
Yeah.
So I think within that particular question, I think there are people who are unaware, who I think
Okay.
who I think are truly who truly want to follow Jesus, and as they encounter more truth and more understanding, I do think that I think what communities can do is really give people permission and power to find communities that are going to be about the gospel and to land safely in community where they can heal and they can experience a renewal of their own spiritual formation and journey. So I think that's a part of it. But I do think, man, I do think that there is a lot of what we're seeing with the current system that was baked into how this system began when that group of individuals all those years ago, really made an intentional effort to sort of, this is how we're going to fight communism. This is how we're going to fight. This is how we're going to fight Muslims. This is how we're going to fight immigrants. This is how we're going to fight the LGBTQ plus IA community. Right? There's systems that are created in order to do that. And you and I, as far as I know, right, we were never, when we were on staff at that church, we were never invited to those conversations.
Yeah.
We weren't, right? But how many times, like, if we want to be honest, how many times did you and I sit in a staff meeting and we were told what people behind closed doors were doing, and then, like, we are given a plan to execute? Like, it happens. We shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. No. So then, like, okay, so this question hits to, like, some of the tension that I felt in the moment that we talked that time a year ago. And it's this sense of hopelessness. And there's a part of me that I'm like, what do we do? What are our options? Like, for me, I wanted to I resist, and there's still a part of me that goes, gosh dang it. Like, what can we do? And so, like, for those who clearly see that there is a problem, what real options are available? That might be the hardest one for you to answer.
No, well, so the first thing is this. There are fewer feelings more debilitating than hopelessness. Um, and when I made that comment, I think before we started talking, I think you named it, and this was more of a lament. Joe, like and I'll personalize this. I remember the first time when the idea of what the kingdom of heaven actually was came alive for me. I could tell you where I was, I could tell you where I was sitting. And I don't know if you remember this, but I called you because you were in Boise and I was in Salt Lake City. And I called you and I said, I want to go back to every church leader I had and say, I want my money back.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, and, and there was a part of me that's like, part of it too, Joe, like if I want to be really, if I want to assume positive intent, which is where I work right now, it's a value that embodies all that we do. And I really try to do that to say, like, if these individuals were simply just teaching me what they knew and how they were raised to think about the world, then they're stuck in the same spin cycle that I was. The question of what someone should do, I think, is a question that requires a lot of discernment, a lot of prayer, and a lot of safe community to help people process that. I mean, I put it this way, man. Like, I went to school, I studied, I gave my entire intellectual and formational being to a particular way of life of thinking I'm going to do A, B, and C forever, and I'm sitting here not doing any of it anymore because I had to leave. because it was even for my own sense of well-being and flourishing, and I'm not the first person, like, and I would never tell someone, like, the first thing I would never say is like, well, you need to get out of there. But there is something about all that to say, like, I'm not saying leave the minute something gets hard. That's like, none of us would ever suggest that. But I would say this, that as your commitment to the kingdom grows, what you're going to find is a desire to be in a like-minded community where the bedrock of the gospel is foundational. And like, I'm a part of a group right now. Like, we still struggle. We still have differences of opinion. We can still look at the world and come at it three or four different ways based on who's in the room at the time. But there is a sense of just belonging and shalom and flourishing and wholeness that is there, like, that allows us to actually practice community together, and then we can be in solidarity for a world that's hurting, that's also lamenting, that's also groaning for new creation. So I would never want someone to feel hopeless, but I would also encourage people to never feel like you are in gridlock or stuck, and that but I do think that that requires finding trusted people who will help you, will help you in that journey and shepherd you to a place of of spiritual wholeness and of healing and of understanding, and even to give yourself and even those around you some grace, because this journey's not easy.
Let's talk. Let's lean into this a little bit, and so I'm going to press in just a bit. When we were talking about leaving, and you were talking about, like, you did. I mean, you left pastoral ministry, that we were working together at a church. You went to the University of Utah. You got your bachelor's there. Then you went over to Biola and got your master's in Christian apologetics. And then you went back into ministry, and you had a season of different spaces that you existed in for a period of time. And then now you're saying, like, and there was a bit of, if I saw the video correctly, as I'm looking at you, a bit of emotion that came out of you as you were reflecting on the fact that you're not doing any of it anymore. And I can resonate with that, because I was 21 when I became a youth pastor and moved to Boise. I'm 47 now. 7 years of youth ministry, 10 years of bivocational pastoring a church, and 4 years of associate pastor. That's my adulthood. And now I'm not doing any of it. I'm doing this, but it's just not at all what I thought it was going to be. So many people that I talk to that are in a place of transition feel like they have failed. That there is this sense of, like, failure. And I would like you maybe to speak to that.
Mhm.
That someone that's listening, that's just like, yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm the only one in the room. I feel like I go to church not because I want to be there, but because that's where my friends are. Not because I'm sitting and soaking in what's being sent to me from the stage, but because my community's here, and I don't know where to go, because if I leave, I feel like I'm failing. When does leaving move from failure to obedience?
So that so I will tell you that okay, let me go back. It's a really good question. They're all good questions, Joe. Good job. I appreciate you kind of picking up on just the maybe the emotion of sharing what I did. Um, I think what I've come to discover, though, is it's not that I'm not. In some ways, who I am is still who I am, and this call to ministry or shepherding people, it's actually, we actually still do it, right? Like, that never ever goes away. Um, but I think I've come to terms with the fact that even though I knew it was right for, like, I knew I had to leave, there is still a deep grief that comes with that because you love the thing. I love the church. Like, I love the church. I love it. And I loved presiding over the sacraments, but it had to mean something. And I couldn't be in a place that wouldn't invite me to be wholehearted with that and to see leadership abuse their position and their power to manipulate and coerce. Like, it to me, everything was antithetical to what I believed was important when I followed into that call. And so I had to leave. And so I think how I would encourage someone to say, like, when do I know leaving is obedience? That is not a question that I could give a distinct, like, this is when you'll know. I think that is where the accompaniment of walking with people, of listening, of encouraging them with their prayer and discernment, asking them to reflect back. What do you, like, when you're praying, what do you sense? Right? Like, and even some of the things that we do to become healthy, like when you step into a space, what is your body telling you? Like, and how do you learn to listen to that? And then how do you give yourself space and time and relationships to really move out into spaces where you can possibly dare be vulnerable again, to be authentically wholehearted? It's not like you're just replacing an expired carton of milk with a brand new carton of milk. It's nothing like that. It's a journey, and it's a process, and it's painful, and there will be, and many of us, I think, are in that journey of going, like, I know I really feel like I should leave, or I really feel like maybe the Lord's invited me to consider something else, but I don't know that I can because of A, B, and C. And what I would encourage anyone listening to say, like, that those A, B, and C's are legitimate things to wrestle in community and prayer with, because they're important. And that becomes the context, I think, in where you can really make a well-formed decision. But again, I would encourage you, find people who will accompany on your journey. And I'll say this, and I know we don't want to, I often sometimes struggle when I hear pastors talk about people leaving, because it's really not even about it's really less about sort of the emotional and spiritual well-being of the person. It's this idea of
Yeah.
of uh, as a
Territorial.
and how they mark their own sense of leadership, and how they, but here's what's crazy. Here's the question I've always wanted to ask in that, like, hey, how did you get here?
Mm,
Like, you left somewhere to get here.
mm,
Why did you get to leave and no one else does?
mm.
Now, I would just say that that's an overgeneralization, but there is this sense of, like, well, yeah, when things aren't good, people leave, and you shouldn't leave, and like, good. Part of being in a healthy community is there's going to be conflict. When there's good conflict, when there is meaningful conflict, when there is important conflict, don't leave, especially if you're with people who can enter into that conflict with a real Christ-like mindedness and a posture of humility that allows for the exchange of ideas and for really listening to the Spirit for a way forward. Like, don't leave. You found a good place if that's the case. But there are going to be times when, for your emotional health, your spiritual health, even your sense of physical well-being, there may be times, like, there are toxic, abusive spiritual environments that they need to be given permission to not be in them anymore.
Yeah. Mm, it's good. Okay. Let me ask a couple more questions. What is one thing you wish Christians would stop doing immediately? Through the lens of, like, all this conversation, like, what's the thing you're just like, man, I just wish if I could broadcast this to Christians, and I would just go, like, hey guys, we need to stop.
I'm going to answer that. I want to answer that this way. I don't know.
It's such a tough one.
No, it's a good question, man. But I think I think part of the challenge with a lot of church leadership and even how we help people on their spiritual journey. Well, I would say this. I mean, I can give something like prescriptive, like stop spending so much time feeding your algorithm, right?
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
that's something, right? That's one thing, but I often think that's more symptomatic of something deeper.
Okay.
I think what I would say is that instead of telling someone like stop doing this, what I would say is if I could encourage Christians to do anything, to say give yourself permission to be curious, to
Mm.
be wrong, to change your mind, and to really embrace mystery, awe, and wonder as very real categories for a world that is much bigger than anyone of us actually understands it to be.
Mm.
And that sounds really lofty and nice, but it's really messy,
So
right? It's really,
we
go
no,
ahead.
I'm with you. Like I live like that idea of curiosity, mystery, wonder. I love that writing that down, and that's something that we cultivated in a safe space with each other, where it was like, you know, I've told the story on Whiskey and the Writings in the past. I don't think I've named you, but I actually told the story of we were sitting, we had, offices that the doors were across from each other, and one night you like leaned out, and because we were at oh my gosh, I'm about to date us, but we were at a revival service in a Pentecostal church working on staff, but you leaned out one night because we had to be there, and you said, "Hey Joe, do you really think that the initial physical evidence that you've been baptized in the Holy Spirit is that you speak in tongues?" And my response was like, I think this is how I remember the response was that, "Well, Mario, that's what they told us." And you went, "Huh." And it like opened a category for me that had not been exposed yet, of this idea of being curious. You weren't trying to erode my faith. You weren't trying to expose a fallacy in my love for Jesus, and like that the Bible is, like some big joke. You weren't doing any of that. You were creating room for curiosity, and you didn't answer it for me. You didn't go, "Hey, Joe, guess what I learned?" You asked a really good question that invoked a part of my brain to be awakened to, almost like I didn't know that those were questions that people could ask. And so you gave permission through your vulnerability for me to ask a better question. And then, of course, it all went to shit after that, because we went to the evangelist and we're like, "Hey," and he's like, "Who have you guys been reading? You need to stop." And we're like, "All right, we're going to tap out at that point." But all that to say,
Dude.
we've lost that ability. Do you remember that, right?
I do. I do.
Dean
Yes.
Niferatos. I'm going to name
Yeah.
drop him right now. I don't know if he's still doing ministry, but who you been
I'm sure
reading?
I'm
That
sure
was
he'll
the
see this. I'm sure he'll see this.
no, no. But but it was a cinema, a real it's one of those moments that shifted the whole trajectory of my life.
Yeah.
Not because I wanted to walk away from what I believed. It was because someone didn't give me permission to be curious and to explore and to live in the mystery and the wonder of it all. And I appreciate what you're saying there, because I feel like that's something we've lost. We're too concerned with making sure we're right that we've never slowed down enough to ask the question, or to wonder if we're even asking the right question.
Joe, there's a couple things with that too, and it is important because I think that is uh, that I think is underneath it all. And I would encourage anyone who would listen to this, wherever you're at on this faith journey, the reality is these things that we think we're going to lose by being curious, actually, more times than not, come back to us in much more holistic and healthy and exciting ways. So, yeah, Joe and I grew up in a fundamentalist Pentecostal environment, and there's a lot about that world that I gladly have walked away from for a lot of reasons. But there are going to be things that I actually have, like, there are things about how I understand the person and the work of the Holy Spirit, the community of, the community of what it means to be a part of God's people. All of that stuff have come back in new and exciting ways. The idea of a better understanding of what it means to be prophetic, what it means to have wisdom, what it means to have, like, words of knowledge. All of these things that have been that were somehow mystified have really become much more earthy and organic, and equally powerful and important. So a couple things with that too, John. This for me, I think the question of what would you tell someone not to do, I will share with this story. So when you and I were on staff, and I'm sure you remember this, when you and I were both on staff in Boise together, you and I listened to the same talk radio show every day, 3 hours a day from 11 to 1. And, like, for everyone listening, like, you need to
Let
understand, Joe and
freedom
I would listen.
ring.
Nah, don't give it away. Don't give it away. Because I want to tell you something about that story in just a minute, because I've
Okay,
shared this on a
okay,
couple of different occasions.
okay.
Um, so we used to listen to that every day. And then Joe and I would go to lunch together, and we would talk about the show, and, like, we would get after it. And we were, I would say this, we were becoming sycophants of the person whose show it was. Like, it was like we were all in
It
on
was
the
all consuming.
nationalism. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything.
No.
And I can remember one day distinctly, like, the Lord telling me, you got to stop listening to that, because you're starting to hate the people I've called you to love. That is the internal dialogue that I had. You need to stop listening, because you're starting to hate people I've called you to love. So I quit cold turkey. My only concern was, like, oh shit, what's Joe gonna think? Like, I actually had that thought, right? Because I'm like, this is what we did, and this was like,
Yeah, this is our
and
jam.
I'll never forget, dude. The very next morning, you walked into my office, and I remember you leaning up against the doorpost, and you're like, dude, I think you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I think the Lord told me to stop listening to that radio show. And, like, we were both like, we like, you, if you were in the room, we were, like, hugging each other, laughing. But, like, that was the beginning of our journey. Now, here's what's interesting. I've shared that story anecdotally when I've taught before in the past here in Omaha. And Omaha is a very largely leans one way politically. And I was sharing the story, and I wasn't name dropping the host or anything. And every time I share that story, the question I got asked by people was like, "Who were you listening to?" And I remember, and my answer was always the same: "Hey, if that's what you took from the story, you weren't listening." I purposely didn't tell you that, because the moment I name drop, you're gonna start. Well, I don't listen to them, or but I do like them. I'm like, you're missing the point. In fact, the fact that you want to know who I'm listening to suggests to me that you probably got more work to do here than you realize.
Mm.
I'm grateful that we had that moment, right? But that's so when you ask the
Mm.
question, what would I want Christians to stop doing? I don't know how to answer that, but what I would say, what I want them to start doing is be okay when you hear that, listen. Like, just listen. What if I'm like, no, I'm good. I really like this show. I don't know, man. I think about that as a pivotal moment in not only my spiritual formation and my spiritual direction, but yours as well, and ours together as friends, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
we really at that point were out on an island where we were on staff
Yeah.
in many ways. But I remember that. So, um, so that was one.
Mm.
And the last one I'll tell you, my senior year at the University of Utah, I had a professor, and I will use his name because he's awesome. His name Dr. Benjamin Crow, and he came into it was now this was before I was into like the liturgical season and the church calendar and Catholic adjacent and all of those fun things. I'll just drop. Um, he walked in and he had I didn't realize it was Ash Wednesday, but he had ash on his forehead, and the whole time he's teaching, I'm like, what does Dr. Crow have on his forehead? Like he got like it was bugging me, and then all of a sudden I don't know how I made the connection. I'm like, oh, it's Ash Wednesday. And I remember having the thought, right? Growing up a good evangelical person, I was taught to think a certain way about other traditions. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad I don't have to do that to prove my loyalty to God. Like I actually had that thought, right? Like this spiritual superiority complex. And as I'm walking out the door, Dr. Crow made it a habit to always stand at the door and wish us all well as we left. And we made eye contact. He wished me well. I wished him well. And I turned the corner. And as soon as I turned the corner, man, the conviction that I had dehumanized someone made in God's image. Look, what I felt the Spirit tell me was like, it was like, how dare you devalue my servant? Mm. And it changed, like, I gave myself permission to be wrong. Mm. I was wrong. And the truth of the matter is, later that year, Dr. Crow gave me the most comprehensive theological education on the problem of pain, evil, and suffering that I've ever gotten anywhere, church Biola included. Still second to none. Wow. Be curious. Be okay to be wrong. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, we've taken some time, and I want to circle back to, I mean, you and I love this, and I'm so thankful that you agreed to come on and talk about this, because just talk about faith, talk about church, because there's an aspect that you're not serving in the same circles that you used to. I mean, I'm not really. And we've not talked about life after to some degree. You know, we've talked about family stuff and things going on just generally, but I was really curious, is Mario even interested in talking about this stuff anymore? Because it's been so much a part of our lives for, 2025. So that's at least 25 years. And then you want to tack on maybe another 8+ years behind that, yep. We met and became friends. And so all that to say, it's been a journey. And so I thank you. And I hope to bring you back, because I have lots more things I want to dialogue with you about that don't have to deal with church, but maybe just theological things that interest me, and I think I want to hear your point of view on. But all that to say, we started with the topic, broken church, can it be fixed? And so I want to circle back. We've had, we've gone on this journey of all these different things that we've been exploring and stories. Let's end on some hope. Broken church, can it be fixed? Answer me that question. More than a one word.
Okay, well, you know me. You're never just going to get it.
Yeah. I was expecting you to be a smart ass and go yes, and then silent. So anyway, go ahead.
So, three things, and I'll move through them quickly. The first thing is this. In the book of Acts, there's this question about what to do with the Jesus movement. And there is a leader in the synagogue who stands up and is like, look, listen, right? Let's just see this.
Gamaliel?
Gamaliel, yeah. Let's let this thing play out.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen movements come and go. Yeah. And based on whether or not they're legit or not, we'll know in time. Right? So I'll start there. We'll know in time, right? So I always think of that. Now, here's what I would also say. The broken church, the church will always, because we are people who still bear the reality of the fall, there will still always be brokenness within the community. That's also true. But here's what I will tell you. Where do I have hope? Because Jesus actually put it this way. This is both in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew's Gospel, and the Sermon on the Plain in Luke's Gospel. Whether it's the parable of the builder or the parable of the soil. Same story, just two different applications. The community that will last, that will weather the rain, the wind, and the storm, will be the community that has its foundation in hearing the words of Jesus and doing them. So what it tells me is that if there is any movement, even if they claim to be a Jesus movement, that does not both simultaneously hear the words of Jesus and do them, at some point that house is going to crash. And great will that crash be when it happens. That doesn't mean, man, that I revel in anyone's destruction or demise. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I can trust Jesus when he says at the end of the day, the things that are not ultimately built on hearing and doing what I'm telling you to do will ultimately find their way back into the rubbish pile, back into Gehenna, back into the garbage dump. So that, I think, for me, results in a kind of resilience and hopefulness and trust. And even a space to occupy in a world that sometimes I feel overwhelmed because I believe this, but sometimes there's so much evidence to the contrary that I'm like, okay, like, really? But at the end, man, like, I feel like Peter, where else am I going to go? You alone have the words of eternal life. I believe it. It's not a platitude. It's not a platitude. Like, and so I really do think, man, when you talk about hope, where it lands, those are the three things. Those are three things that I can look to and go, here's why I have hope. And Christian Dumais, in her book, Jesus and John Wayne, at the end, it's like a throwaway line. She indicated from things I've heard her talk about, like on podcasts and interviews, that it's not a happy read. It's not a happy read, but the editor's like, dude, this is sad. Like, we need some hope. And she makes this comment of saying, like, that which we've done can be undone. Systems can be built. Systems can be dismantled. And more just, more holy, righteous in the right sense of the word can be moved in place of them. So that's why I have hope.
Thank you, Mario. Love you. Give Tara my best and the kiddos. And we'll chat soon.
Sounds good.